Greetings, brothers and sisters. I saw last night CNN came up on my YouTube feed. CNN is trying to do damage control with Brian Stelter explaining why it took them so long to fire Chris Cuomo's. And I just watched a little bit of it, and it's fan-frickin-tastic. And there's a trailer to a Disney or a HBO Max Santa Inc. satanic, right, cartoon that people are upset about. I haven't seen the trailer, but one of my viewers sent it to me. And it's actually called Santa Inc., like Santa Inc. is satanic, right? And so I want to cover those things. And then Alec and Hilaria delete their Twitter accounts, so that feeds into the Chris Cuomo thing. So I'm going to cover those things in a second. But there was some good stuff I saw. And like I don't recommend things like other people. I just talk about things I enjoy because I don't know if you'll enjoy it or not. But when I was sick, there was a couple of things there's one thing that stood out that my wife and I watched. And then over the weekend, we saw another movie that, was good for what it was. And then we watched this comedian, and I wanted to talk about that because it was interesting on a couple of levels. Then I'll get to the other stuff. So when my wife and I were really sick, we were not enjoying watching TV. It was just to kill time between sleeping. We were sleeping 14 hours a day, 15 hours a day. I mean, it was brutal. And we would, not really be eating, and we'd just be sitting there. We'd eat a little bit of food and watch something just to keep awake. It was that bad, and not really enjoying what we were watching because how we felt, right? And, I was getting a little bit better. I had that one day where I felt like just my vital force, my life force was gone. I was just laying in bed, almost in like a coma-like state, and really weak. And then maybe not the next day, but the day after that, my wife and I watched the movie, I think it's called Pig, with Nicolas Cage. And it was absolutely brilliant, like probably the best movie of the year. We saw it, I think, on Hulu. And, I'm not sure everyone who would like it, but it was very interesting. It was, he was, I don't want to get into what he was, but the movie begins with him being out in the woods in Oregon, and he has a pig that is a truffle pig. And, it starts in an interesting way, and it gets sort of Eyes Wide Shut, Bohemian Grove in a way, and the interactions and, just how bad Nicolas Cage is as an actor. Like, I don't remember any movie he was in that I thought was a good movie, or at least that he didn't, overact. And he is absolutely, it is a brilliant performance. And it's kind of truther. I mean, it's truther in a sideways way. And I was like, wow, this is a masterpiece of a movie. Like, I would never expect Nicolas Cage to deliver such an incredible movie. The relationships in it, how it deals with grief and real things, like real, issues that people are going through, the loss of loved ones and things. And being really sick and not enjoying anything, just not enjoying physical life. That's how bad we were feeling. And we were like, oh my God, that was incredible, right? Just, masterpiece of a movie. And then this weekend, my wife and I watched Free Guy. A couple of people had told me to watch it here. The movie with Ryan Reynolds. And I dislike Ryan Reynolds. I've talked about that before. He's always shilling now. He has all these ways he shills on various platforms. And I realize that he isn't really funny, but he tries really hard to be funny. And he's kind of just annoying. And when you have that shift, his movies are harder to watch, right? Like when you have that shift of, it's just he tries too hard and to be funny, and he's just, kind of a shill and annoying. And, so I really dislike the guy personally. So I didn't really want to watch the movie, but it had been recommended to me, and it was really kind of brilliant too. Not as deep as the Pig movie, but he plays an NPC, and it's very much a truther movie, and it's well done. It was a a situation, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, where people who I don't respect what they do, like I'm not a person who would watch either a Nicolas Cage movie or a Ryan Reynolds movie, but they both delivered. I mean, it was, in terms of the movies themselves, a product, which, I find interesting, right? Because I have a prejudice against them. Like, think about one, like, masterpiece Nicolas Cage has made. And, he's always in these that face-off movie with him and John Travolta where they switch faces and they always overact. And, he's just kind of like a joke. And he made this, like, masterpiece of a movie. And then, this thing with Ryan Reynolds where I said, I've talked about him before. He's just annoying, but, he's much more subtle in this movie. And the movie has, quality jokes and humor, but it has a bigger truther perspective, a spiritual perspective about the illusion, right, that we all live in. And so both of the things were, kind of truther. And then another night, maybe I took a little nap or something, so I couldn't go to sleep when my wife went to sleep. And so I was up, and I started watching this comedian, and the guy's name was Drew Michael, I think his name was. It was on HBO, and it was Drew Michael, Red, White, and Green. And the guy, he brings up Bohemian Grove in a joke, and he's got a little truther stuff in there. And he just savages Hollywood's hypocrisy, like in a very intelligent, brutal way. Kind of like I do here, but, a person much more angry, but somebody who is much more connected to the celebrity culture and angry. And he savages Jimmy Fallon. I mean, it's brutal. Like one of the jokes, and I can't do justice to the whole bit, but it's very it's a very intelligent kind of presentation. It's almost like in a small room with a bigger room that they expose later on, but it's kind of like an intimate room because of some of the stuff he says. And he says that compared to Jimmy Fallon, Jay Leno was like Malcolm X, right? I mean, how superficial Jimmy Fallon is, pretty brutal. And then the guy gets into his like inner pain and therapy he went through, and having not being able to perform and be a comedian, his lack of ability to have intimacy. It gets kind of heavy, but I found that interesting as well because we're somewhat similar, right? Like not that similar, but we have, a similar sort of maybe thought process, me and this comedian. And I realized it made me appreciate the heartfulness, cleaning, and transmission and having a goal. Because the guy really is, he really exposes his emotional pain. And like he was going to therapy 4 times a week, because of, whatever. And, and I know therapy really doesn't work because it mostly addresses the ego and not the soul, like not your spiritual essence and what's important. And so, like I was thinking, I said to my wife, this would be me if I didn't have heartfulness, right? Because of the anger he had, the hostility he had, even hatred he has for the celebrity culture and some of these other things. He talks about social media in a kind of interesting way, and all of it, right? But for me, the cleaning in the heartfulness system, but finding a goal, which has just been a complete blessing to me. Years and years ago, this guy was in his early 30s, and when I turned 29, I found heartfulness. And before that, I was so low functioning, I couldn't sustain relationships, like marital type of dating relationships, particularly. Like I just was so introverted and just, like not able to connect with other people. And, not finding a purpose. Like all my friends were getting married and, finding careers. And I was in my late 30s still spinning my wheels, not being able to find anything in the American dream for me, right? Any purpose. I didn't have a goal. And I couldn't, I couldn't keep jobs for very long. I couldn't sustain relationships. I couldn't handle stress on a, even a remedial level. I mean, really low functioning person. And, I had all these various sorts of talents and abilities that were going to waste and things. And it was the heartfulness system, the most important thing is finding a goal. Most people don't have a goal in life, right? And when I'm talking about goals, it needs to be a spiritual goal, like an overall purpose to your life, which is to find out what your soul's purpose is, to find out, you know, what your reason for being is, what your reason for living is. On a soul level, you have a soul's path, right? And most people never find that. Most people are going backwards and sideways on their soul's path. Both things simultaneously taking a backwards path, going in the wrong direction where it's going to be harder and harder for them to return to the source, and then going also sideways on that path and getting farther and farther away from the path, right? So not just even going directly backwards, but going backwards and sideways. So getting away from the path, both on a horizontal way and a vertical way, in between, and moving, in a deviant path. And they're getting farther and farther away from connecting to God inside them and their soul. Like many of you are in that, situation. I mean, even people who do heartfulness, it's sad for me that, that people who have found heartfulness, and what I've been interacting with these people lately, and they found a system that is specifically designed to help you figure out what your soul's path is and be on that path and connect to God and have a goal, right? Have a spiritual goal that's an overriding goal of all your smaller material goals that are also a part of that, right? And that's what I have in my life. I wake up every day working on moving forward on my spiritual path, and then these other material goals, making these videos and, working on our farm as a family and all these things, doing all that stuff, which is, fun as well, blessing in different ways, but they're part of an overall goal, and meditating and connecting to the, divinity within me. And, how important it is to have that, just to be congruent with your soul and be on your soul's path and moving forward. Like, I can't even explain, I can't even think of life without that, without that overall goal in my life, right? And you see a lot of people, maybe a lot of you, who are so obsessed with the beast and the system and people getting punished. I mean, this is why I don't really care when, what happened to Chris Cuomo is people are like, oh, wow, yeah, this is great, he's fired. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it doesn't register emotionally for me at all. Because, what I cover here is people who are clearly not connected to God and are clearly not having a spiritual purpose or goal, right? They're not going forward on their spiritual path. And mocking them is actually, it would be doing a service to them if they could change. Because, I'm not competitive with anybody about spirituality, what I know about it, because I wish everyone would do it. I wish each one of you and Chris Cuomo's and Alec Baldwin and, anybody would find their soul's purpose and their soul's path. I mean, it's up to each person, and all of you certainly, right? And the Heartful system is, a supercharged system to help people do that. The cleaning and the transmission. Like, I watching this comedian, seeing, again, we weren't that similar, but we have a similar thought process. He had bits that, are kind of like my things in a different way. But his anger and his confusion and his therapy and all these things, he's still a very tortured person, right? And very materialistic because of not having the spiritual goal. And, I was just thinking about that blessing when it happened to me, when I found heartfulness, and it changed everything for me. And how the system works so well to clean away, all the stuff that's blocking you. And, because he's talking about like not being in relationships and intimacy, things I struggled with before heartfulness, and how easy it's become for me to give love and affection to my wife and, people who, need it for me, my dogs. Like, I'm just, it just generously pours out of my heart. That's because, it didn't do that before I did heartfulness, right? Where I can just, love can gush out of my heart. I can give people and, whatever they need from me, right? Without thinking about it, right? Without feeling, any sense of being hurt or being, whatever it is. Intimacy isn't a problem at all for me. This guy talked about it for a while. how he had such a problem with intimacy. And it's because the heartfulness system, it just wears away at all these psychological issues and all these, hurts and, damage to your heart and all the things that go wrong with people and, trust issues and things. And just opens up your heart and allows love to pour out of it, right? And it saddens me that there are people who are doing heartfulness and they volunteer and they've donated money and they've been doing it forever and they haven't gotten that yet, right? And I don't, even though I don't like them, for their failure, and I don't like Alec Baldwin for his failure, right? It's just people who are failing and going in the wrong direction. I wish everyone would be able to do that, right? Like I wish people would pass me by, especially younger people, wherever I am on the spiritual path. Because, on a material level, we can be competitive because it's finite resources, finite money, finite fame, finite attention, right? All these things that are out there. It's, limited to the planet Earth. And everyone's competing for resources in a very greedy way. Like people want all of it, right? And they want to leave they want everyone else to have almost nothing or nothing, and they have all of it. I mean, the people who are so greedy. But on a spiritual level, God is infinite. And your ability to return to the source is, each person's personal spiritual path. So it doesn't have to be competitive, right? And so when I mock these people, I don't, I don't have any resentment because they don't owe me anything, right? And, and how bad everything sucks. And we'll get into this with CNN in a second. How bad everything is just, going in the wrong direction, taking people away from God. And so it needs to be pointed out, right? So that's why I mock it, not because they owe me something and, they suck. I mean, they do suck, but their suckiness really doesn't affect me. It just helps me prove my point to you guys that spirituality is the only answer, connecting to God, because famous people, look at Alec Baldwin, you look at Chris Cuomo's and Andrew Cuomo's, you look at, any of these celebrities and people out there, they're living the so-called dream, and, it's a nightmare. They're not happy. Like, Madonna, Madam Expiration Date, all these people I've talked about, they're not happy because they're not connected to God. They're not going forward on their spiritual path. And if you're not going forward on your spiritual path, your life sucks. You're failing right now. Especially at this time where it should be pretty obvious to people that the material, goals and the lifestyle they've set up here in the beast is an absolute joke. And people who so-called have success, don't succeed at all, right? The only real success is to find out what your soul wants you to do and do it. And it's, very easy using the heartfulness system. But you have to do the work. Like, anybody can put you on the spiritual path. It can tell you how to get to the spiritual path, but are you going to walk down it, right? And most people, even after they get to the spiritual path, have struggle moving forward, and for me, I just recognize it as a complete blessing. Anyway, so I want to say those things, and let's get into the stuff with Alec Baldwin and the CNN thing that's so great. Okay, so let's start here with Alec and wife Hilaria delete Twitter accounts days after Rust interview. The interview failed epically if you have to delete your Twitter account, right? If you have to delete your Twitter account, you failed recently, especially if you're like a celebrity and somebody who is a faketivist, because the problem here for Alec Baldwin is he's one of these fakeitivists, a Hollywood celebrity. This guy, Drew Mitchell, like savages these guys, an elitist, right? Somebody who, and again, the way that people talk about the elite in the truth community, like a lot of you are obsessed with the elite. And, that's because you haven't found your spiritual path and your spiritual goal. The way Alec was obsessed with Trump, right? Because those guys aren't stopping you from finding your spiritual goal. The elite aren't stopping you from connecting to God, which, once you have that in your life, it changes everything. That's why I had that long introduction. But anyway, people like Alec Baldwin who are lost, and he's bought into this celebrity liberal agenda, whatever it is, the Hollywood morality. And him and his wife are out there, and they're pushing this, whatever it is. And then things go sideways for him, and he's built up a lot of bad blood. A lot of people are upset, a lot of Trumpers at him, And so then he does this interview, and the interview is so bad the next day, he not only deletes his Twitter account, but this is his most recent post from Instagram. And they have it here that it says, comments on this post have been limited. And it's so only people that he's following or something, right? And so they've, gone dark on social media. They're not allowing people to post on social media. That means they're getting rolled. And that's, post-interview that was supposed to do damage control, right? Because it's an active investigation. But I covered how CNN had even turned on him. These liberal, Huffington Post and CNN, these liberal places. And I don't even know why he's posting about Robert Dole. Senator Robert Dole died early this morning in his sleep. At his death at 98, he served the United States of America faithfully for 79 years. He's, and then he says R.I.P. Why? Like, do you like Robert Dole? Like, what? Because he wasn't Trump? You're a Democrat. He has some thing here. And so I don't know what he's doing. He's just sharing other posts here or something. But he's gone dark on social media, and he loves social media. That means that, his interview went disastrously. And that's going to tie into this Chris Cuomo thing. I want to get to that. So this is Brian Stelter, and I saw this, YouTube. I'm paying more attention to my YouTube feed on my phone now. I hadn't done that for years, but now, YouTube recommended this to me, which was kind of great. And I watched just a little bit of a taste, and let's just get into it. It speaks for itself here.
The biggest media story this weekend. It's the firing of Chris Cuomo from this network, CNN.
Wow, you must have the inside dope. Let's get the inside scoop from Brian Stelter. Let's get it, Stelter. I want to know what's the inside stuff here, Stelter.
Now, I've been working the phones ever since this was announced yesterday.
He's been on the phone working those phones ever since it's been announced. He's been getting the dope for us. He's been getting the inside scoop of what went down at CNN.
Evening. Frankly, I've been on the phone until the last 5 minutes here getting information about what happened and where CNN goes from here. So I'd like to...
Where does CNN? I don't even know CNN. We might as well just shut CNN. Is there a switch? Just turn off CNN. Cancel CNN altogether. I don't think CNN can even move forward.
Start, now that you know the news about Cuomo's firing, with a timeline of how it came to this point. Why was Chris Cuomo fired now, after CNN management supported him all year long?
Exactly. Why did that happen when clearly he should have been fired? He's, kind of admitting, and I think he admits to it more as you move along here, that they should have fired him earlier, which they should have. And we'll get into it here.
That's the key question I've been pursuing as a media reporter for the past, 18 hours or so. So here are the answers I have so far. Let's take a look at the day-by-day timeline this week to catch you up. On Monday, the New York Attorney General's office released that document dump. It landed with a thud. There was a lot to read.
It's a thud. It was a thud, a document dump.
Damning. Some of it about Chris. Now, Cuomo's view is that he never engaged in opposition research on behalf of his brother Andrew. Cuomo says he's never smeared anyone. He never went after any of his brother's accusers. Plus, the Attorney General's office never accused him of that. But the documents, especially the text messages between Cuomo and his brother's aides, showed a level of coziness with the governor's staff that was alarming to many.
Okay, so they have emails coming from Chris Cuomo to the governor's staff, right? And CNN didn't know about those emails, and Chris Cuomo wasn't asked to turn over those emails because they were going to become public. So CNN completely failed in their internal handling of this. You understand that these are emails that Chris Cuomo, when your boss says to you, when you're working for a news network and your journalistic integrity is on the line, they would say to you, okay, did you engage in this? And Chris Cuomo would say no. And they would say, all right, can we see any social media, posts, emails, anything, text messages from you to your brother's staff that might come back and bite us in the ass here at CNN. We're going to back you. We believe you, but we need to know that there's not some emails, that's going to be released later, like, is happening now, that's going to do damage to our brand. And if it comes out that you've done this, then, we're screwed. So we want to back you, but is there anything out there? And he should have turned all these things over, right? And they should have access to it anyway, because it's probably emails. I mean, it might be personal emails, but probably coming from something to do with CNN, right? And so, they should have fired him anyway. But this, to come out here and this is their job, right? To investigate these interactions. This is news that's happening. And CNN is finding out from the Attorney General of New York releasing emails that they should have asked for from Cuomo's, right? So this is already him talking about how CNN sucks at being a, media outlet, right? They're not journalists, because this is happening at their, with their one of their stars, primetime stars, and they let it happen.
CNN leadership on Monday bought some time to scrutinize the documents by saying it would conduct a thorough review. So that was on Monday. On Tuesday, Cuomo's producers were back at work to produce another episode of Cuomo Primetime. But there was growing criticism of the anchorman, both outside and inside CNN.
Yeah, they should have, but this should have been done a year ago, and I'm going to get into this in just a moment. This is so bad. Like, what he's saying is he's trying to do damage control, but he's just making it worse the same way Alec Baldwin made it worse, because he's being dishonest and CNN's being dishonest, right? They waited too long to fire this guy.
By the evening, management had seen enough in the documents to take action. Cuomo was suspended, quote, indefinitely, pending further evaluation. This language made clear that Cuomo was not just being benched for a week, in some sort of performative punishment. This was a real reprimand.
We all knew they were going to fire him. This was a step towards firing him. Like, they had to figure out how they're going to fire him for cause. He has a contract. They were going to do some sort of settlement, maybe a payoff, whatever, to get, cut ties. We all knew they was fired, right? Like, we finally knew that CNN was doing what they should have done years ago. So he's just this is him just lying to the audience. Like, the suspension was just a way to negotiate the firing. We all know that. And, for him to come out here and just absolutely lie about that in Brian Stelter fashion, because he's working the phones. He was getting in the inside scoop, the inside dope on Chris Cuomo's.
But the language also left the door open for Cuomo to possibly return after the holidays.
Yeah, no, it didn't. Come on, bro. The language, yeah, you're going with the official statement. You're not, analyzing what the rest of us know. He was done.
Depending on that quote-unquote further evaluation. It seemed clear to me that management was balancing the concerns of staffers with the feelings of viewers. On one side, important complaints about Cuomo crossing clear journalistic lines and damaging CNN's brand. On the other side, concerns about Cuomo as a person and respect for the fact that he put his family first. And
come on, you're making it sound like the people at CNN have hearts, right?
You know what? Some people felt all of the above. My phone was lighting up on Tuesday with calls from CNN staffers, some of whom said Cuomo should have been fired right away. But also
2 years ago.
Also with emails from viewers saying CNN was being unfair to the anchorman.
Okay, let's stop here because I want to show you some things. I'm coming back to this. This is not, we're in it. We're in it to win it here, right? This is important, funny stuff that this guy's presenting. This is apocalyptic brilliance at CNN's expense. But I just want to, do some fact checking of CNN, what they're just saying now to move forward. So it's kind of hard to find, this was saved by USA Today, but it's kind of hard to find a lot of these interactions. But Chris Cuomo was not the only person pimping out Andrew Cuomo. And when you give exclusively positive coverage of a political candidate, right? We saw this with Fox. Fox for years went partisan. They were all about the Republicans, and they were doing the Republican talking points, and they were just Fox, right? And CNN and MSNBC weren't doing that as much. They were, leaning Democratic, but they weren't out and out shilling for the Democrats the way Fox was. Fox was talking about the liberal media, and they were on their heels, and their ratings sucked, right? And then Trump came, and Trump happened, and they went full, like, crazy liberal, the CNN and MSNBC. They went even worse than Fox, right? And Fox does it in Fox is kind of stupid the way they cover it. They've always been like, they dumb it down for really stupid people who are like really stupid Republicans, red meat. But CNN and MSNBC went just ballistically, partisan. And then they stopped being legitimate. They were never legitimate, but pretending to be legitimate and fair and balanced. And they just went to one side. And the side was, we hate Trump, right? And in this process, they started to make heroes of any Democratic politician. And this guy was one of them, right? One of the biggest ones. And they started giving free positive coverage to a political candidate, which journalists should never do because, it costs millions of dollars, billions of dollars in, social media ads. And I mean, they were putting this guy out as a national presidential candidate. And it was even being suggested he was going to replace Jojo Magoo without going through the nomination process, right? Because Jojo Magoo was melting down on a physical level. And so these guys were, were pushing him out there, pimping him out there as possible, substitute for JoJo, calling him the real president, like he was acting presidential about COVID and Trump wasn't. And they had all these exchanges, and Chris Cuomo was pimping him out positively, right?
Was it this?
I was trying.
Or was it this?
The Cuomos display some more brotherly love live on national TV.
Hey, I'm Ralph Biaversa, and here's what we're covering on Entertain This.
Chris Cuomo welcomed his older brother, New York Governor Andrew, back to his CNN show.
And so, this guy, I mean, they're calling it entertainment, and like how positive his coverage was of his brother. And then when Cuomo went to his basement, and Andrew was a part of that, and Fauci, they were all together on this, and they were all being celebrated as the heroes, and Trump was being portrayed as the goat of COVID, right? And so that went on for a year or so. During the whole COVID thing, it had been going on for years where Andrew Cuomo was getting complete positive coverage from a national news network that not only affect him as a New York politician, but as a potential presidential candidate later on, right? And then this happened.
Before we start tonight, let me say something that I'm sure is very obvious to you who watch my show. And thank you for that. You're straight with me, I'll be straight with you.
What does that even mean, right? How can we be straight with you? If you're straight with me, I'll be straight with you. You lie to me, I'm going to just completely BS you guys all the time, right? But as long as you guys are straight with me, were you watching our shows, right? Are you, what are you talking about? We're not in a dialogue, right? You'll be straight with me and I'll be straight with you. But otherwise, it's a lie fest. He's such a tool.
You're straight with me, I'll be straight with you. Obviously, I'm aware of what's going on with my brother. And obviously, I cannot cover it because he is my brother. Now, of course, CNN has to cover it. They have covered it extensively, and they will continue to do so. I have always cared very deeply about these issues, and profoundly so. I just wanted to tell you that. There's a lot of news going on that matters also, so let's get after that.
And that led to this, right? We'll get into this in just a second, but that was a huge problem because you can't cover your brother positively as a journalist and give up your journalistic integrity and back a political candidate and give him free access to a national audience and then all the donors and things and then not cover him later on, right? Like I have to make, and I'm not a journalist. I make, spiritual, humorous content here, right? Commentary on what's going on, but I cover subjects like Chris Cuomo. And then, if there's some sort of arc to their story, people expect me to finish and cover all of it, right? And if I cover somebody positively or something positively, which I kind of mostly don't do, but even like to do with the heartfulness stuff, right? Things went south for me on an organizational level, and I had to say something about it. People are doing heartfulness, and they've heard about it through my commentary, and it's the good, bad, and the ugly, and you have to be honest about it. I love heartfulness. It's been a great system for me, but I had problems with the organization, and I was honest about it, right? If you're telling the truth to people, people expect the truth from you, then you can't back away from the story just because it went sideways on you, even if it's your brother, right? And so, him saying that he couldn't cover his brother, well, he shouldn't have ever done what he did, and CNN shouldn't never have allowed him to do what he did. And he wasn't the only one. They were all doing it over on CNN. They were pimping Andrew Cuomo out, right? And there's a bigger problem here than the eventual scandal, and I'm going to get into that. So that led to this, right? This is not so long ago.
Before we wrap up tonight, there's one more thing I do want to say about me, my brother, my family, and you. First, thank you. Thank you for
You're welcome.
reaching out. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was nothing. Don't, I'm just mocking you.
The concern and the support. I really do. My brother, as you know, resigned as governor of New York and will be stepping down next week. There are a lot of people feeling a lot of hurt and a lot of pain right now. And my hope is that ultimately everyone involved can get to a better place.
Yeah, that's not happening. You're going to be fired in the near future, and you lied to your boss and the public because you said that you didn't go after people for him, and you did, and you used CNN's resources and your so-called journalistic credentials to go out and dig up dirt on some of his accusers, right? And this should have been, the whole thing, he should have been fired years ago for this if there was any journalistic integrity at CNN, but he wasn't, right? This was a conflict of interest 2 years ago, 3 years ago, especially when COVID came around. And then, on a bigger level, we're going to go into the bigger issue here in a moment, but he should have been fired for all of it, right? He should be fired for sucking and not being a journalist, but that's not what CNN does, and we'll get back to Brian Stelter in a moment. It's a lying network, right?
Some higher good will be served in all this. As for me...
What higher good, right? Come on. What are you talking about? You guys are just,
I've told you it's never easy being in this business and coming from a political family, especially now. This situation is unlike anything I could have imagined.
Are you serious? It's the easiest thing to imagine ever. Your political brother that you shilled for would someday find himself in a scandal. That was going to happen, right? And that scandal there would be a conflict of interest between your job and your coverage of him or lack of thereof on CNN, that he might be fired. This happens all the time, right? Especially to, someone like him and his brother, right? They're really sleazy. Well, I would have never imagined this could happen. What are you talking about? It's the easiest thing to imagine, a political scandal, and you shilling for him, choosing your brother over your profession. It's very easy to imagine. In fact, it's such a no-brainer, anybody could imagine it.
And yet I know what matters at work and at home. Everyone knows you support your family. I know and appreciate that you get that. But you should also know I never covered my brother's troubles because I obviously have a conflict. And there are rules at CNN.
Yeah, and there was rules in the beginning where you were pimping him out, right? That was, when you gave him positive coverage for years, especially during the COVID time, that was inappropriate. It was inappropriate for CNN to do it even more so outside of your show. They had an inside line to Andrew Cuomo, and they made him into some kind of hero, and then just, that just exploded, that imploded. And then, things went south, and they should have fired you all during that period of time. Everyone who understands anything about journalism and journalistic conflict and integrity and things, he should have been fired years ago. And it's not like he's killing it in the ratings. This is the post-Trump they were doing pretty well when there was a lot of hatred for Trump. And that's all. They made Trump central to everything they were doing, crapping on Trump. It became MSNBC and CNN competing for the Trump hatred news viewers. But then a year ago, a year after Trump lost and JoJo became president, I mean, not even that, 6 months, people got tired of hearing of Trump, right? Their anger and their hatred for Trump has dissipated, and CNN has tanked in the ratings. And this guy particularly, right? He was doing poorly, and so there's no reason to keep him or his show. But they did anyway because they're CNN.
CNN about that. I said last year that his appearances on this show would be short-lived, and they were. The last was over a year ago, long before any kind of scandal. I also said back then that a day...
Yeah, but you had appearances, and they were like infomercials for the guy. Anyway, so let's get into the real problem here. See, the real problem with Andrew Cuomo was the nursing home deaths. So when COVID was just, going, up in New York, and they had huge problems in New York, and he was being covered as a hero, he made a decision to take sick people who had COVID, and put them into nursing homes with the most vulnerable group. It's mind-boggling how stupid that is, right? And so there were 9,000 deaths that occurred, maybe even more, of people who wouldn't have gotten COVID had he not made that decision. People who didn't have COVID then got exposed because he decided to put sick people in nursing homes with the most vulnerable population. And then to make it worse, he and his staff decided to hide those numbers from people in New York, who were responsible for all of that, and on a national level. And so there was a cover-up. And this is much worse than any of his, sexual misconduct allegations and things like that, right? Where he tried to kiss a secretary or something like this, or he made some sexual comments to some coworkers. This is people dying. And CNN and all these major news organizations didn't really cover it and haven't covered it, but it's, the real problem, right? And Chris Cuomo being fired, like he should have been, decimated the whole CNN for pimping Andrew Cuomo out, getting him an Emmy, talking about him like he was, the next president of the United States, or, he was being pimped out there by them as a network. And so this is the real problem. This is the real story, because these deaths could have been prevented and, the suffering to go along with it. But they decided not to make this into a story. New York has, found a different way to fire him, Andrew Cuomo, and then all the stuff to do with Chris Cuomo, right? And so, this is, the real story here that's been undercovered. Nobody's talking about this, but it's the real problem. And it's a huge problem for CNN because they're, not covering this. And they prop this guy up, Andrew Cuomo, and then his brother, all the stuff to do with him. So let's get back to Brian Stelter here.
So there was this balancing act going on. Now, unbeknownst to viewers or staffers, CNN management also engaged a premier law firm, Cravath, to assess the document dump. By Wednesday, with Cuomo's suspension all over the news.
They should have done that 2 years ago, or at least a year ago, when the scandal first came out, and they should have suspended him, really did an in-depth investigation, but they didn't. And so CNN has failed completely on this, right, as being a news organization that has any sort of journalistic integrity.
Cravath was quietly at work looking through the texts, looking through Cuomo's public statements, looking to see if it all lined up. At the same time, CNN boss Jeff Zucker held a meeting with the staff of Cuomo's primetime show, and the sentiments there were clearly in Cuomo's favor. This part has not been reported anywhere I've seen. Those staffers for the 9 p.m. show talked about the anchorman's talent and the pride they felt in the show. So
the show sucks, right? I mean, it sucks. Like, I regularly made fun of this show. Like, you just tuned into it, and he's a dope. He's not some brilliant person, Chris Cuomo. And he's a shill, but he also is very annoying and, over the top, crazy eyes, and the show sucks. I mean, for him to come out and say the staffers were like, "Oh, we got to save this show," this was lost over a year ago. I mean, when Andrew Cuomo's scandal broke, Chris Cuomo needed to be fired. It was something that had to happen, just on a journalistic, just on appearances, like you're a real news network, right? When you're coming out and saying you're not fake news all the time, and you're getting killed by the people doing, like real investigated for sort of journalism on the internet, right? Where there's more truthful information, and you're losing your audience to social media. And, your whole thing is that you're the real news and you're authoritative news. You got to fire this guy, right? There's no reason not to, because his ratings suck. And, you're eventually going to have to. I knew for years, I knew for this whole period of time, they're eventually going to have to fire this guy. This was going to only end in one way, right? And CNN had all the access to all the information. And if they'd done any investigation and journalism in-house, they would have fired this guy, right? But they backed him, when everyone else is going, you got to fire him. And he's like, no, we're going to back him, right? And to say his staff was like really into it.
So there was a real wide array of feelings in this house. You've got CNN staffers saying, get rid of him, he shouldn't work here, he's hurt us. And then you have some of his own producers saying, let's bring him back. He should be back. Now here's the other thing that was unknown to the staff, or the press, or the public. Late Wednesday, a lawyer contacted CNN with a sexual misconduct complaint about Cuomo.
Why? Like, why then? Like, why, why all of a sudden, they get this thing had happened, that made it easier to fire him. Just, but this whole period of time, there's nothing. But then there's this, right? Like, this is just this is him just out and out lying, right? This is them, contriving ways to get rid of him, right? Firing him for a cause, way to get rid of the payout or whatever it is, and then coming out and just lying about it, right? You should have fired him a year. He's admitting here, they're admitting that they should have fired him a while ago. They're admitting that they didn't do any real internal investigation until this thing broke last week, and it was already way too late to fire him. They already failed, and they should have done it earlier. And now he's just coming up with excuses and reasons why it was the right time. It wasn't the right time. The right time was never to hire him. The right time was, 3 years ago, and 2 years ago, and 1 year ago, and 6 months ago. But now you're so late to the party.
On Thursday, CNN management reckoned with that charge, which is from an anonymous woman who worked with Cuomo years ago at ABC. The New York Times and other outlets had investigated Chris in the past, looking for signs of the same allegations that caused his brother's political downfall.
So you see here, you look up there, and he's using a New York Post article. Like the New York Post has covered, for example, Joe Biden's dopey son, Hunter Biden, right, in ways that CNN never has. Like legitimate news. They're ignoring that his laptop, his hard drives that he and, the Biden administration has basically admitted to. But it says here, sexual misconduct allegation leveled against fired CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, December 5th, 2021. New York Post, right? But then if you go and do some more research on this, which it's CNN job to do, right? Especially now, you find this. Chris Cuomo accused of sexually harassing ex-boss Shelley Ross at 2005 party. And she came out and said this, and the date here is September 24th. So this is literally 2 months ago. And CNN is just finally getting around to this. I mean, this is the same accusation, right? This has been verified, witnesses, I mean, it's, this is pretty much factual. And CNN's just getting around to this now.
So when a CNN spokesperson announced that additional information came to light, it was referring to that misconduct allegation.
There was already an allegation that CNN could have verified that was being covered, right? It's more than just, it was like 3 months ago. That was already a story out there, which was, pretty much validated, where she said she was humiliated by him. this might be the same person, but we already knew about this. New York Post covered it, 6 months ago or whatever that was, right? 4 months ago. And so, like, this is so bad. He's just doing an Alec Baldwin here. He's making everything worse for CNN. This isn't helpful. Like, he's trying to explain why it took so long and our internal process. Yeah, it's you're just admitting to failing over and over again at CNN to have any sort of journalistic integrity and, all of it.
Now, right now, I know almost nothing about the allegation. Nothing's really been reported about it publicly, other than the fact that this staffer worked with Cuomo at ABC. But we'll catch up to that in a moment. We're on the timeline here. We're up to Friday. Okay, according to two sources familiar with the matter, the law firm Cravath turned in the results of its review on Friday. And the review said that CNN had grounds to terminate Cuomo. Zucker made the decision and notified Cuomo of his firing early Saturday afternoon. And then Zucker said in a memo to CNN staffers, quote, "It goes without saying that these decisions are not easy, and there are a lot of complex factors involved."
Yeah, this was an easiest decision you ever could have made. Like, unbelievable. Like, they're making it complex. You had reason, and you should have fired him as soon as the scandal happened, right? And then before that, because of the conflict of interest. And before that, because he sucked.
Chris Cuomo said in a statement that he didn't want his CNN career to end this way, and he thanked his staff for the great work that they've done over the years. As for the misconduct claim, the New York Times broke that news late last night, late Saturday, with attorney Deborah Katz saying her client, quote, came forward because she was disgusted by Chris Cuomo's on-air statements about his brother earlier this year.
Earlier this year, a long time ago. And she came forward just when they're about to fire her. Or is it a story that was already out there that they made more, she hired an attorney and went to CNN just when they needed her to do so. So come on, like, it's completely contrived here, right? You're lying about all of it, misrepresenting all of it. Like, this is, you supposed to be doing damage control. Like, you should be fired for this piece right here. The whole CNN staff should be fired, right? Like, this is, you can't claim to be truth tellers when you're lying all the time, right? You're supposed to be reporting the truth, and you're not doing that.
Far, let me just double check my emails. We're talking here. So far, Katz has not responded to my request for comment today, but a spokesperson for Cuomo has responded and said these apparently anonymous allegations are not true. Times reporter Jody Cantor pointed out both Cuomo brothers have lost their positions in the wake of Me Too accusations. So, what happened here? This is about a confluence of factors.
No, it's not. It's about you guys just sucking. You guys not being real news and you being a liar here, right? This is what this is really about, that CNN sucks, and you're admitting here without admitting it that, you had access to all this information for, the past year, and there was a conflict of interest at the heart of this thing with the Cuomo brothers during COVID and Andrew Cuomo's heyday and Chris Cuomo's basement days, right? And now you're basically backpedaling and giving excuses and making it more complex than it had to be, right? He should have been fired as soon as it came out that he supported his brother in various ways, was using CNN resources and talking to staffers and other people to help his brother in his legal situation. And that all came out. That came out 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and all of it, right?
A series of headaches that seemed like they were never going to end. I said on the air last night when the news broke, this seems like a case of death by 1,000 cuts. And my reporting sense back...
Why do you need more than 10? Right? This was... Everybody knew it. We all knew you were going to have to fire this guy. Like, it was one of those things where not firing him was just you admitting that you're just a shill network. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Like, appearances don't matter. And, journalistic integrity doesn't matter. Every day that you went not firing him when you should have fired him like a year ago or whatever it was for this, but it could have been for something else earlier, was just a day CNN was sucking even more than it usually sucks.
backs that assessment up. This was about not any single headache, but many headaches that continued to pile up. So it seems CNN management had decided to terminate Cuomo based on the law firm's review, based on the document dump, based on his behavior with his brother. And then this sexual misconduct allegation also came along, and it was yet another factor. A CNN spokesperson saying overnight, when the new allegation came to us this week, quote, we took them seriously and saw no reason to delay taking immediate action.
Yeah, because you want to fire him now. See, there was an allegation out there from a credible source, Chris Cuomo's old boss, that was backed up by other people that he apologized for. I mean, I don't remember all the complexities of the story, but it was credible. And it was put out there by the New York Post, which they just showed you the New York Post now, right? Because they wanted to fire Cuomo's now, but back in September, they didn't. And so this seems to be another staffer at ABC when, they already had enough to fire him without the allegation. Like, it's just so ridiculous, right? This is like an Alec Baldwin-esque report. It's just more incriminating and demonstrating CNN's failure to keep any sort of journalistic integrity. Now it's out there, like they're basically admitting it without admitting it.
So there's still some unknowns here, some unknowns about what that sexual misconduct allegation is. It's possible that reporters will reveal more in the coming days. As I mentioned, I have not heard back. It's
just an allegation, right? The allegation wasn't investigated. It's anonymous. There's this other allegation that was out there from this woman, a former producer of Cuomo from ABC. If it's that same person, then that's already a known factor, right? But it really shouldn't have brought about him being fired because they hadn't really investigated. He's saying here they don't know much about it. And so they're firing him for something that they knew about 6 months ago, that he helped his brother. And he used CNN resources in his position to do so. And so it was whack on a journalistic level, right? And he's just admitting to all this and saying, it's 1,000 cuts, it's 1,000 headaches. No, it's you sucking. This isn't about Cuomo's. That's long, you should have fired him. It's about you failing to do what you're supposed to do.
Back from that lawyer yet. But Cuomo's defense, the outside PR person he's hired to defend him, says these apparently anonymous allegations are not true. So there is a lot more to unpack here. It's been a bruising week for CNN and with a significant change in prime time. And there could be more fallout to come. So I want to bring in 3 non-CNN voices into the conversation to be as transparent as we can with you at home.
That wasn't transparent. Transparent would admit that you failed to investigate this properly, or you investigated and you didn't care, and then something changed your mind, right, because it became untenable to keep him.
With me now is Sarah Fisher, media reporter for Axios, David Zurwick, professor of media studies at Goucher College, and Mara Scavacampo, journalist and host of the Run Tell This podcast, formerly with NBC. So thanks, everybody, for assembling this morning. Sarah,
Avengers Assemble.
You've been reporting on this just as I have. What are the biggest unknown questions that you have this morning?
Yeah, Brian, like you, I want to know what's actually in that complaint, and I do think we're going to get more reporting about that as it comes along. I also want to know why CNN delayed taking action. They said in their statement that they had taken action finally, once the allegation had come through, but they had cause already. So if you already had cause, why didn't they immediately fire him then? I also want to know about this pending investigation. They say they're going to continue to investigate this matter further. Well, What does that mean? Are they going to commit to making the revelations from that investigation open to the public? Are we going to learn more about CNN, about their culture, about this exact situation? And then finally, what precedent does this set for the news media? So many people in news have personal connections to people in power. Does this change the way that we think about how reporters and...
No, and no, right? This is just business as usual. They're going to move on to something else, right? Hopefully something Trump-related or like that. And they're just going to talk about conspiracy theorists and fake news and how social media is wrecking everything when they clearly failed here and their not being real news has been exposed. And what she's saying, why not bring up the stuff to do with the nursing homes? I'm going to go through and watch this because we'll see if any of them bring up the nursing home thing, which means they've brought in 3 shills to talk about things that are less explosive, right?
Correspondents and anchors deal with those personal situations. I assume it will, but we will only see as time goes on.
It's a great point. So there's such a complicated case here where you have this apparently a former ABC staffer, someone who worked with Cuomo at ABC, making this allegation. Then you have all these producers who currently work for Cuomo singing his praises, and they are, at least the people I've talked to, quite disappointed that Cuomo's been terminated. So a lot of tension in this. Let's go, David.
A lot of tension, really upset. A lot of tension. This is a two-way story.
Zerwick next. Ultimately, this is about trust in media, as Sarah was referring to. Trust in media. Has CNN lost trust as a result of this, Zerwick?
Well, I don't know. That's hard to say if CNN.
Yeah, they have. Like, you guys have lost. Look, you've already lost trust. You've already been eclipsed by social media. I mean, this is a big part of what this is about, because these media shills that aren't able to report what they believe or what they're not investigative journalists that find out things about the powers that be, the intelligence community more than anything else, CIA, that just hands them news stories that they cover that are pro the agenda of the national security agencies, and then all the other stuff, the Democratic Party talking points, all of it, right? You've lost any credibility as being journalists, and people aren't interested in it anymore, especially young people. They get their news from social media, which you guys are trying to censor and complain, right? And this is just, for the people who are loyal audience members, they're, as asleep as they must be to watch CNN. This is bad for them, right? And with the lack of something that pulls people in, like the hatred of Trump, you got nothing, right? This guy, I don't know if it affects the trust. CNN has no trust, right? The mainstream media has no trust in terms of, what it used to be.
CNN has lost trust. I think this really, Brian, goes to the heart. Sarah's right. These relationships are out there. People know about them. And it is one of the things that makes people not wary. They don't trust the press because they think it's elites dealing with elites, taking care of elites. We say we're watchdogs, but we watch some people harder than we watch other people. They're our friends.
And you don't watch anybody really. What's been the big journalistic breakthrough story, Watergate-esque, which was, a shill story in itself and went after Nixon in a way that was, whatever it was. But what's been the big news story of our generation? Like, there's been so much crap done by the so-called elites, right? Like, this is, he's getting to the heart of why people have tuned out mainstream media, because it's elites talking about elites that they're friends with that own their news networks, right?
Relationships. There are people trying to court favor with powerful people for information. Here's the problem. We've really lost sense of media ethics in our profession, especially in the last few years. You have to ask yourself first, and this is the mistake that Chris Cuomo made, and in some sense I think CNN made this same mistake in not forcing him to ask this. Who do you work for? Who do you serve? Obviously you serve and you work for your employer or you don't get a check. But beyond that, who are you talking to? You should be serving the public. That often...
Listen to this guy. Yeah, that ship has sailed long ago. And the reason is that, there hasn't been a news story. Like, they went after Trump, right? Trump was president, so it sounded like they were speaking truth to power. But Trump wasn't really in power. They were pushing this liberal agenda. Name one time they've gone after a real story, the real stuff behind Iraq, right? They, covered the wars in Iraq, all these fake wars. And then when they're leaving Afghanistan, we realized it was a complete failure. The war in Iraq was a failure. The war in Libya was a failure. The, police action in Syria and these other places, the whole Arab Spring. And it was all lied about, and the media just rubber stamped these wars that destroyed people's lives and I mean, millions of people dying in these things and wrecking countries and spending money and, soldiers dying, American soldiers and foreign, so all this stuff, right? Civilians dying. And, there hasn't been a time where these networks have stood up against true power. I mean, really in my lifetime, but certainly recently. And they're pushing this agenda. They're just shills for this overall agenda. The stuff with COVID, right? The, opioid crisis. They never stood up for anything. They cover the story after it's already been broken, and they don't, they don't follow through so there's any legal or judicial ramifications, right? The Sackler family walked away with $5 billion after taxes, and, they were largely responsible for the whole opioid crisis, as was the pharmaceutical companies. What about pharmaceutical power? I mean, any of these big, powerful organizations, these media outlets don't cover it at all, right? That's why they're getting killed by social media, and they're trying to censor people. This is them censoring social media and then being exposed.
Oftentimes puts you at odds with people in power. You have to sacrifice that. If somebody cuts you off for information because they don't like the information you're giving the public, too bad. Too many people in this business, and I think this is a little worse than it is. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. It's not better.
Yeah, you're not going far enough, bro. You guys are they live on the surface, right?
Print than it is in TV. It's across the board for everybody now because we're all one big digital world. People don't ask that question. Cuomo, come on, he's a lawyer. He should know this. He should have asked himself that, and he wasn't. People say, look, he wasn't. He was taking care of his brother. He wasn't giving me information. If you were a new resident in New York, he wasn't giving you information that would help you cast a vote more wisely in the next election or know whether to support the governor. No, he was serving his brother. Now that complicates it because of the brother.
But, see, that's the thing. That's Brian, the thing. I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime ethical dilemma that doesn't.
Yeah, okay. This is once in a lifetime.
Try to let everybody off the hook, but there's never going to be another moment like this where there's a brother as an anchorman of a governor in the middle of COVID, and one of them gets COVID. Like, this was a once in a lifetime situation. That doesn't mean that everyone necessarily did the right things at the right time, but it was unique.
Oh my God! Did you just hear what this MNFer just said? Did you see it? Like, this is his big excuse. This is how they end the segment. That's the end of the segment. And so this is a 10-minute video they put up on YouTube. And his thing is, well, this is such a unique situation. He's a governor's brother, and COVID happened, and we got COVID. It's so unique. I don't know. Of course we couldn't, we never dealt with anything like this before and won't have to deal with it again. And we're completely off the hook because it's unique. There's nothing unique about this. You hired a guy who was part of a political family from New York City and New York State, and there was corruption in the family before, and there's corruption in politics. And at some point, there was going to be a conflict of interest, right? CNN set this up. Like, they knew this was a potential problem, but it's such a ridiculous, the news media is so fake now and so, one-sided and so bowing before the elite and the intelligence community and the Democratic Party in the case of CNN and the Republicans in the case of Fox, right? It's so partisan and it's all lies and it's all corporate that they didn't care about it. They just, whatever reason they wanted Cuomo around, they just said F you to journalistic integrity because they could have fired him at any time, right? For them to say, well, we are now investigating this new allegation from a former staffer at ABC that worked with Cuomo's. There was an allegation 3 months ago from his former boss that you could have validated back then, right? It's the same sort of allegation that was going against his brother. And none of these guys are even talking about the nursing home scandal. Like, that's like real news that they're not covering, right? He covered it up. Like, even if, he didn't make a mistake, which he did, which was put, sick people in with the most vulnerable population, which resulted in deaths. He then covered it up. And that was the big scandal. That was the one that started it. And then they shifted to something else that was, less rife with the whole COVID agenda stuff coming down. And I mean, they just shifted to something else, right? A distraction to get away from that epic, what could have been an epic, huge media event that all these guys refused to cover, right? And, your job is to cover unique things. Like, oh, this is a unique situation. Well, yeah, you're the news media. You're going to have unique situations, especially when you hire a guy who's the brother of the governor. And so this is just, it's CNN failing. So I'm not going to get to this Santa Inc. Trailer. I'll do that probably today on the other channel, my apocalaughsnow channel. Got something to do about Tom Brady's wife, Giselle, weird turtle thing. So I'll probably cover those together later. This is a longer video than I thought. I just want to wrap this up by saying that this is a time when, when a yuga is ending and you're going through a transitional period and there's this time of collapse and rebirth, stuff comes up, like truth comes up in your own personal life. You can't hide away from things that you've repressed, thoughts, feelings you've had, and it comes up nationally. And they can't do anything about it, especially when you have a really shill organization of mainstream media that's been suppressing truth, and it just comes back up, right? Chris Cuomo was a bad hire. He does a bad job. CNN's a joke. And then this thing happened. They didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't care. They said F you to, what they should have done, which was fire him a year ago. And they should never hired him for, whatever. And they should have never allowed him to pimp out his brother and have these positive, joking, just 100% positive media coverage. And they made him a hero. CNN and MSNBC made him a hero. And they talked about him like he was a hero. And then this happened. And so, the whole network should just be wiped, right? It just should be deleted for just failing. But they're, still able to limp around, make some money, and have some influence. And so they're being kept around. But, nobody respects it. Very few people respect it anymore. Nobody with a pulse and any awareness. And this is just, it's a spiritual time where we're shifting away from a materialistic system and debt-based economic system and, all of it, Hollywood culture, all these things that are collapsing. That system's collapsing. That's like the Cro-Magnon man or whatever, and the Neanderthal man or whatever was, the lesser. And then you have a new human being, a conscious human being, a spiritual human being connected to God on a deeper level, manifesting something from a divine place and finding one's soul's path, like I talked about in the beginning of the video. And those things are, there's one thing eclipsing the other, right? We don't see it yet, but it's the death of something more primitive and more, selfish and egotistical, a culture, a person, everything, a paradigm. And one thing is, dying and the other thing is coming along to replace it, right? And it's, transitionary period, which is really tough. And the truth is coming to light. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Barbano. Definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.